former Labor advisor Darrin Barnett and former Liberal MP Fiona Scott. Great to see you both. Fiona, first to you. We look at this list of Australians travelling with the Prime Minister and Governor-General. Saba Abraham, I just spoke to a little moment ago. Wonderful to see that she'll be there as part of the delegation, Fiona.
Yeah, it's fantastic to see, and it's fantastic to see Australians being honoured and walking on what's going to be an amazing point in history. So, it's fantastic that the Palace has offered this to so many other Commonwealth nations. Like, it's also good to see that 11 New Zealanders are also making the trip. And, further to that, you've really got to take your hat off to the Albanese government for extending the offer to also help, the smaller Pacific Island nations to be able to get themselves there to also honour who is their head of state as well. So, it's really a remarkable point in history.
Darrin, do you think the Prime Minister's got the response right he does not want to go anywhere near talk about the Republic or anything along those lines in the days after Her Majesty's death?
No, that's right, Kieran. And the group of 10 people that are going on that trip to pay their respects to the Queen, it was not canvassed whether they are Republicans, who they vote for, what some of the other points of contention in Australian life might be. They're 10 Australians. They will all go as a group and pay their respects on behalf of the nation. I think also it's worth noting that the Prime Minister, you really could not accuse him of being at all Republican about his approach. He has put Parliament on hold. There's a national holiday or a day of mourning. He will be attending with the Governor-General. There'll be other Australians in attendance. I think the Prime Minister's shown great leadership and maturity in the job by being as inclusive as possible at this fairly interesting and traumatic time for plenty of people in Australia.
It's a good point, Fiona. A lot of Australians, I think, not just Australians, but members of the Commonwealth and those in the UK, a lot of people feeling it personally, the loss, given the Queen was such a steady presence for more than 7 decades.
Yeah, look, it's strange to think she's not there because she's just always been there, and for so many of us, we've never known any other head of state. I mean, for someone like myself who's, a political junkie and all the rest of it, I'm finding all of the procedure and process of even the new head of state and how that's been carried across through so many other Westminster parliaments that we've not seen. The idiosyncrasy that we're seeing in Melbourne, that in the Victorian government, that's not been in any other places in New South Wales. The fact that the Scottish Parliament has remained sitting, the English Parliament has remained sitting, the New Zealanders today have had their condolence motions and what have you. Anthony Albanese has then suspended ours, which he claims goes back to a further precedent. It's quite amazing when we've all had this nucleus Parliament come out of Westminster, and whether you stand on the monarchy or republic debate, all of these Westminster parliaments do have their foundations in London and have these histories that go back thousands of years. And, at this point, while we're sitting there watching all of this and watching the evolution of how the Westminster system of parliament and the head of state has these slight nuances that is culturally different and significant everywhere. Even on this question as well, what that means for the interpretation of Great Britain, how the Scottish feel about this, how the Welsh feel about this. There's a lot of questions that will come about in days ahead. But right now, it's quite amazing to watch all of the way democracy works, even under the form of a constitutional monarchy.
Absolutely. That immediate accession as well, very much, we haven't seen it in our lifetimes, have we? There's a certain stability, that's for sure. Now, Darrin Barnett, let's turn our attention to some other things on the agenda, whether the federal ICAC can be legislated before the end of the year. Is there time to do so? The Prime Minister had said during the campaign that was his intention. He reiterated that to me yesterday, but today he makes the point that it does depend in part on others as well. Will they or won't they back it in time to get it legislated before Christmas?
Well, I think there's a bit of a semantic argument about whether legislated means introduced, debated, passed both houses, and it depends on the agreement, what amendments there might be. So, look, I think, broadly speaking, if there's demonstrable movement on a federal ICAC by the end of the year, that should satisfy most pundits and most members of the public, and probably even the crossbench. If the intent is clear, there's some legislation that's been introduced and it's being debated, that in the end it's a 3-year term. I know it was said year one legislated, semantic argument, but if there's demonstrable movement, I think that should be okay. And from what I've heard, that movement is occurring.
Fiona, that's a good point from Darrin. If there is that sort of clear move, and if it's February after a Senate committee or March, it is within a few months. Would it matter too much?
To be honest with you, Kieran, I think we need a federal ICAC. I want it to be right though, and the last thing I think that we need from something like this is for it to be rushed because it was an election promise. If it takes Anthony Albanese, I mean, this is probably different to the view of other Liberals, but if it takes him 18 months to get it in and it's done correctly and we don't have witch hunts that we've seen in New South Wales, but it's actually a fair process and it has all the scrutiny that the Parliament needs, that it is good legislation, then I hope it takes its time. I mean, at the same token though, I mean, he did make an election promise. He did promise by the end of the year. I mean, that was what he had said, and then he said in other places that the legislation would be tabled. I mean, maybe that was, you know, a bit of overzealous eagerness during the campaign. But, you know, you don't want to get these things wrong because, you know, these things ruin people's lives if innocent people are, you know, wrongly convicted or wrongly brought before witch trials. So, I mean, for the sake of good legislation, I hope it takes the time it needs to. I hope it goes through the full committee process, has the scrutiny required and has any, you know, potential amendments that would be needed to go through by that parliamentary process.
Once it is passed, Darrin, it'll be interesting to see how the Teals readjust, because that would have been the climate bill done, ICAC done, or the Federal Corruption Commission done, and they were the two key pillars. How do they then make themselves relevant?
Well, I think the other third pillar they had was women in Parliament, so they all probably want to be re-elected, Kieran. Look, I think the Teals have positioned themselves well in their relevant debates. In the end, frankly, they're occupying coalition seats, so Labor will be quite happy to help them deliver what they pledged to deliver. I guess then there's another 2 years for the Teals to try and make their own stamp on their own electorates. They need to decide whether they will collaborate with other independents, whether they all sort of go it alone, will they pool staffing and resources, how will they use the committee process, the parliamentary library and other things, and their resources are lessened compared to previous parliaments. So significantly interesting times ahead for the Teals, but you're right, their first two big ticket items may well be pass the parliament by the end of the year.
Darrin, Fiona, great to see you both. See you soon.